Hey YouTube, it's KJ. I've been missing in action for quite some time now. Sorry, life is kind of hectic. Um, but I figured my parents have my son, so why not come on here and do a story time and a quick update on my life. So my story time today is going to be my trying to conceive story, my pregnancy, and my labor and delivery story all tied into one. The longest one will probably be like the pregnancy and labor and delivery. The trying to conceive went pretty quickly, actually. I started trying to conceive about 3 months before I actually got pregnant, and I was pregnant twice in that time. So I'll get more into that after my update on life. So my update on life is I'm in school, currently taking 2 classes. My other 2 classes start on the 28th. So I'm a single mom, as most of you know. I've been trying to get my son into daycare and find a consistent job, which has been super hard to get back into the work industry because nobody wants people with gaps in their history. I was a stay-at-home mom for almost 2 years, so people see me and they're like, you've been out of the workforce for this amount of time. So it's been really difficult, and right now I'm just kind of doing side gigs. Like I'm doing Shipped right now, and I was doing another side gig called Shift Smart. It's basically like a virtual call center type of thing. I stopped doing that. Not going to go into detail on why. It was just not reliable. It was great income for anybody looking for a job. It's good income. I'm not going to lie. Like, it paid well. But the only problem was it just wasn't reliable. There's not really management above you. So with Shipped, it's a little bit more stable. But then again, it's not really promised hours. You're not promised what you're going to make. So if you're trying to pay bills, it's great for extra money. But if you need a specific amount, you don't know how much work you're going to have to put into it to get that amount. So it's good if you need something, but it's not something where you know you're getting this amount of hours and this amount of income, because you can like skyrocket in the amount of income you have one week, and you can get like significantly less the next week with the same amount of deliveries. So that's what I'm doing in the meantime for income. I also published a book on July 4th. I did hint at that on one of my videos back a while ago. I did a poetry reading from those. I started writing my second book. I'm about a quarter of the way done with that. I'm trying to think. Anything else interesting in my life? Not really. Just doing my thing, trying to be successful for my son and get through the bumps in the road, trying to just get on my feet, really. That being said, I guess I can get into the story time now, so here we go. So my trying to conceive story, I guess I can start like, I wanted to be a mom since I was 14. Obviously at 14 I knew that was not the time for me, and I knew I was gay, so like it wasn't like a situation where I could just end up pregnant on accident. It didn't work like that. I didn't sleep with men. So around 18 I actually started having irregular periods, a lot of pelvic pain. I went to the gynecologist for pretty much like the first time, and they told me that I had something called PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. Basically, it's a hormonal imbalance that causes cysts on your ovaries. It can cause infertility. It can cause facial hair growth. There's a lot of different side effects. Obesity, higher risk for diabetes, stuff like that. It's a lot to get into, so I'm not even going to get into all of it. But pretty much they told me that there was a pretty low chance that I would ever have a kid without fertility treatments. And me personally, I've always been pretty much against putting hormones into my body. Now that changed recently when I started taking birth control, not because I'm sleeping with men, for any of you out there who are like, if you like questioning that. No, I've never been with a man. It's not a concern for me. But with PCOS, one of the treatments for that is birth control. And I denied it, I denied it, I denied it up until recently when I just got tired of tracking my period, it being irregular. I got tired of the acne. I got tired of the side effects from PCOS. I got tired of the weight, not being able to lose weight. I got tired of all of it. I got tired of the pelvic pain, missing my period. Like, it just all became too much. So I decided I would give birth control a chance. But that's totally nothing to do with what... Anyway, so they told me, basically that I had this condition that would cause me to have issues conceiving without fertility drugs. A lot of fertility drugs do work, but there's also a lot of side effects, and it's expensive, it's time consuming. So I pretty much like checked out on trying to actually conceive at that point. Like, at one point I was tracking my ovulation and I wasn't ovulating. So I just lost my spark to say, like, the doctors aren't always right. So I started to believe them. I started having, like, pregnancy dreams, like realistic pregnancy dreams, to the point where I would wake up crying and grabbing my stomach because it wasn't real. I really thought I would never be able to have a kid. So it was really devastating for me because, like I said, most of my teen years I wanted to be a mom. Like, that was the main goal for me, was to be a mom one day. So being told that, it was just like, it was like the most devastating news I think I've ever received. So jumping forward to when I was, I think, 22, something like that. I'm pretty sure I was like 22. I started ovulating out of nowhere. Don't ask me why, because I have no idea. I just started having these weird symptoms. Most women know them as ovulation symptoms, but as somebody who never ovulated, I had no idea what they were. So when I looked up my symptoms, it came up with ovulation, and I'm like, well, why not take an ovulation test? And it came back positive. First ovulation test to ever come back positive. So at that point, my periods actually kind of regulated themselves. And at that point, I was like, I may miss my chance to get pregnant if I don't try now. So I was married at the time. I mean, I'm still legally married, but we're separated. But we were actively together at that time. So I talked to her about possibly trying to conceive. We agreed on it. It was like, it was difficult on both of us because she had always planned to conceive first. So we had to change our plans a lot because at that point, like, I didn't know what my time frame to be able to conceive was. So we then began actively looking for a donor. So trying to think of when it was. I do believe it was July of that year. I don't even know what year that was, but I was 22. I don't know. We found a donor on a Facebook group, actually, a known donor. He was on the known donor registry. I'll go ahead and say his name because he is a super great guy. Like, I'll go ahead and say his name. His name is Mark Cross. So we spoke to him. He gave us all of his information, his social, his address, his girlfriend's phone number, everything. Literally, he was up front from the get-go. He talked to us on the phone. So about 5 months after our, like, initial encounter, just getting his information, we actually tried to conceive. So that would have been, I'm assuming that would have been July. So it was 5 months before that when we met him. It wasn't July when we met him. I don't remember. But I'm pretty sure it was like 5 months after we initially contacted him that we started trying to conceive. And that would have been the end of July of when I was 22. So maybe I was 23. I don't know. I have no idea. I'm 25 now, so maybe I was 23. I think I was 23. I don't know. I don't really care. So when we started trying to conceive the first time, I actually did get pregnant. My hormone levels were a little strange, though. I had what was called a chemical pregnancy, which is basically just like an early miscarriage. I found out at 4 weeks and 3 days, 2 days pregnant, that I was pregnant. And by that point in time, you should have like a blazing positive test, but it was just then showing up. So I just figured like, okay, maybe, maybe we messed up on the dates or something. Like maybe I wasn't ovulating when I thought I was. But we got 4 positives that day. The only one that was like a blazing positive was the actual digital test that showed pregnant on it. The next morning, I woke up to take who would have been my wife at the time, to work, and I was bleeding. So of course, panic mode jumped in. Bleeding when you just found out you're pregnant, obviously, not normally a good sign. Sometimes it can be normal, but my first instinct was I don't think this is probably normal. At that point, I was having no pain, no other symptoms, just the bleeding. So I took a digital pregnancy test because I had another one, and at that point, it showed up negative. So what we believe happened is I miscarried the day before, either before I went to sleep or like in my sleep. And throughout the night, my levels just began dropping. And because the pregnancy tests were so like faint, it was clear that my levels were already super low because it was barely showing up on the pregnancy test. For a digital to show up, it has to be, I believe, 25 MIU for your HCG levels. So that's still barely anything. Like it's super low. Like I believe that it has to be at least 30 to even show up on the test that they use in the doctor's office. So that's how low my HCG levels already were. So at that point, that test was negative. So I kind of knew then what was happening. So of course, it being our first time dealing with this, we went to the hospital. The hospital basically just like denied that I was ever pregnant in the first place. They told me that all these 4 tests were just false positives. I was never pregnant in the first place, and pretty much treated me like I was losing my mind. So I told them, you can just go ahead and sign my discharge paperwork. I'm not going to deal with this. We know what happened. You don't want to listen to me. At 4 weeks, there's going to be no uterine changes. Nothing's going to show up on an ultrasound. Like, it's too early for anything. So clearly we know what happened, but they didn't even want to run the blood work to check my HCG levels. So we went to another clinic after they signed the discharge paperwork. They ran my HCG levels and they came back indeterminate, which would have been, I believe, like, I don't really recall. I think it's like 0 to, or no, not 0. I think it's like 5 to 7 MIU that comes back indeterminate, and then anything above 7 is positive. I don't really know. But my HCG levels had dropped into like an indeterminate range. So my philosophy on that was it would have come back negative if I was never pregnant in the first place, because after I had my son, they checked my HCG levels. They were like I think it was like either like a 1 or a 2, and it was like 2 months after I had him. So I still had the hormones in my blood, everything. So my philosophy on that was it would have come back a 0 because that's what it was before I actually was pregnant. So at that point, like, we kind of figured out what happened. We did the research, we figured it out. So I was really depressed. Obviously, I had wanted, like I said, for such a long time to have a baby, that when I actually ended up having this early miscarriage, it kind of deterred me from wanting to try again, because at that point my anxiety was through the roof and I did not want to ever experience what I experienced. Fast forward to the end of the day that I actually had the bleeding, I was having like severe cramps, severe clots. I was having like a huge, terrible hormone headache that lasted me an entire week. The symptoms were just excruciating. And every time, you pass a clot, you just remember what is going on. And it's like just a super devastating process. Sorry for the TMI. I don't know. I feel like you kind of have to expect that coming into a pregnancy, birth, and delivery video, that there is TMI moments, because there's a lot to it. It's not something that's kind of cut and dry. So the details are actually imperative. So fast forward about That was my early miscarriage was August 6th. So fast forward to October 25th, I tried again. I actually tried again in the like 2 weeks after that because my miscarriage was so early. I actually ovulated at the normal time. But I barely put an effort into trying, so there was no real want for me to get pregnant. I think at that point I was just too scared to get pregnant again, that it would happen again. So I didn't really put any effort into it. I was stressed, I was depressed. It just wasn't the right time, so I didn't get pregnant. But fast forward to October 25th and 26th, we tried again. Fast forward 2 weeks after trying again. Actually, I'll even go back for like before the 2 weeks, like within that 2 week time period of me waiting to find out if I was pregnant. I started having symptoms pretty much like, I'd say maybe 3 days after trying. And yeah, I know that's not possible, blah, blah, blah. But my intuition kicked in. I started tracking my symptoms. At that point, like 10 days after my ovulation date, I actually got my positive test. So I didn't even wait the 14-day period you're supposed to wait. I got my positive after 10 days. So when I had my positive that time, I didn't really want to get too excited because of the fact of what happened the last time. So fast forward to 5 weeks and 6 days pregnant. I had some spotting. Actually, that was 5 weeks and 5 days. I had some spotting. I went to the hospital to have them. My pregnancy had already been confirmed by that point. I guess I should add that. I went to an OB. They confirmed my pregnancy with a pregnancy test. They set up a date for me to have my first ultrasound, which was going to be at 6 weeks and 5 days pregnant. They were doing it early because of the history of like the chemical pregnancy. They wanted to start tracking it as soon as they could immediately see an actual like embryo. So 6 weeks and 5 days, they scheduled my first ultrasound. So 5 weeks and 5 days, I started having spotting. My wife was at work and I woke up because she had worked overnight, and again I had woke up and I was spotting. Now, it was really light, probably not a concern, but that's how the first time started. So I picked her up from work. We went to the hospital to have my HCG levels checked. Everything was good. They sent me home. They told me everything was good. No big deal. Probably just implantation bleeding later. Like later implantation bleeding. I don't know. They told me everything was normal. Everything was good. But my baby was measuring like a week behind, which those of you who have been pregnant know that that's not something that's unheard of. A lot of times your baby can be a week behind, a week ahead. Sometimes your baby can be 2 weeks ahead. Everything is just based off your baby. Like at that point in time, it's really, they don't even like give you a due date that early because everything is so, it can just vary at that point. So they basically told me like it's not a big deal. Come back and have my HCG levels rechecked. So, the next day, we were at the courthouse dealing with something personal. We were being harassed by somebody that we had to get like, it's called an injunction against. So we were talking to the actual, like, I don't know, I don't remember who it was, but it was whoever made up the injunction paperwork and set the court date. When I stood up from the chair, I felt like somebody stabbed me with an ice pick in my left ovary. Probably the worst pain I've ever experienced. It actually knocked me off my feet back into the chair. My wife asked me, am I okay? The lady we were talking to, she's like, are you okay? And at that point, like, I really didn't know because I was still sitting. So, you know, so when I stood up, I kind of felt like a gush. As most of us know that, the first thing that would come to mind is I'm having another miscarriage. But at this point in time, it would have been further along. I was almost 6 weeks. So, I ended up not wanting to know. Like, I felt the gush and I was like, I don't want to know. So I didn't go to the bathroom to check, but I already knew that I was having, like, I already knew that it was blood. So we went out to eat and I had to go to the bathroom. Like, when you're pregnant, you pee all the time because of hormones. So I had to go to the bathroom. I went into the bathroom and I had forgot what had happened because we were just talking and having a good time. And when I went to the bathroom, it was a bunch of bright red blood, which normally bright red blood is not a good thing. Old blood is a little bit, like, more acceptable, which would be like brown. But it was bright red. There was no clots or anything, but it was just like, it was a lot. So at that point, I just thought, I'm having another miscarriage. I need to prepare myself for the worst. So we went back to the hospital because, again, this is the day after I was just in the hospital for spotting. So I went back to the hospital. They did a internal ultrasound, which is different than like over the belly. They go actually like inside to check because the baby's so small. They did that and they told me that my son's heartbeat was too low. It was like 92 or 93. And at that time it should have been like over 140 or 160. So they told me it was a threatened abortion, which is what they call a early term miscarriage. And basically told me prepare for the worst. And then the doctor was a huge douche, excuse my terminology, but he told me to collect tissue to find out why I kept having miscarriages. And obviously it's because my kids are coming out with like chromosomal issues, and kids like that aren't supposed to be here. Now, I'm not even going to get into that because it's just pissing me off even talking about it. He was super, super rude about it. He was super, he just didn't even give a shit how I felt, and the things that he was saying, he didn't even care based on what I was going through. That, no, he shouldn't have been saying it. He was super inconsiderate. So I called the nurse at my OB at the time, and she basically flipped out because of everything that he said to me. She's like, they shouldn't even have checked his heart rate that soon. He, like, I say he because my son is here now. So if I'm saying he, like, it's not because we knew what it was at the time, like, but it was my son. So, basically they were like, they shouldn't have never checked the baby's heart rate at that early stage. He was only 6 weeks, like. So she's like, they probably saw your heart rate. It's just too inaccurate. Come in for your appointment and we'll let you know. Fast forward, I come into my appointment. Everything's fine. My baby looks good. My baby's on target with growth. He was okay. So all of this, you're going to lose your baby, like freaking me out, being super inconsiderate and rude. Unnecessary. My baby was fine. So, fast forward to my actual pregnancy. I was sick the entire pregnancy, literally from 12 weeks until 36 weeks. I was on medication to help me with my nausea. I was taking it 4 times a day. It's a medication called Diclegis. Or it was like 3 times a day, and one of the times was 2 pills, something like that. I don't remember. But that was from 12 weeks up until 36 weeks. Because by 12 weeks, I expected it to clear up. So I was kind of waiting to ask for something until it didn't clear up, and it started to actually peak at that point and get worse. So that was one of the issues that I faced. About 23 weeks pregnant, I ended up with pneumonia. I was hospitalized for it. I was sick for like a month before they finally diagnosed me with pneumonia. It was a pain, like it really was. And I'm not going to go too far into detail. Maybe I'll do like a pregnancy story later and explain like everything. Like, it was a really crappy experience. The hospital was a crappy place. Like, a lot of stuff happened that I'll actually probably go into detail in a different video because I'm already at 20 minutes, almost 21 minutes. So I'm just going to like skip through all the details and probably go back and do like a more detail oriented one based on each component. So then fast forward to, I don't even know. I was having like nosebleeds ridiculously like frequently, and they would last like 15 minutes at a time. I was having like severe migraines to the point where it was like for 6 days at a time. would get like 1 day of relief, and then it would come back for another 6 days. My swelling starting at like 4 months was ridiculous, like to the point where my skin was so, like my body was so swollen that my skin on my stomach actually looked like an orange peel. That's how swollen I was. Like, it was really, really bad. So I had started telling them around like 24 weeks that I suspected I had preeclampsia. Mind you, my baseline blood pressure, preeclampsia is, I'm sure there's people that haven't been through pregnancy that are going to watch this, so I guess I'll explain preeclampsia. It's like a disorder when you're pregnant that causes your blood pressure to go up to unsafe levels. It can cause like kidney failure, it can cause like organ failure, it can cause seizures, stuff like that. So the first sign of that is the swelling, because it impairs your kidney function. So I had told them at that point that I believed that I was developing preeclampsia, but nobody really listened to me. Nobody wanted to hear it. Nobody, because my baseline blood pressure was so low, I wasn't meeting the blood pressure criteria for preeclampsia. So no one was listening to me. I was like just below, like the bottom number was supposed to be over 90 to even qualify you for preeclampsia. I was at like 89. So fast forward a little further to like 34 weeks, and I started having these more, like, these higher blood pressures. They would go up to like 90, 92 on the bottom, 94 on the bottom, 100 on the bottom. So then they started taking me a little bit more seriously, but not really. So 34 weeks, I actually went into a different hospital for these preeclamptic symptoms. They found out that I was having preterm contractions. I wasn't in labor. There was no cervix changes or anything, but I was having contractions, and they weren't regular contractions, but they had to stop them because, again, I was only 34 weeks. At that point, they found out also that my amniotic fluid was low. I think they said it was like a 6. It should have been over 11. So it was significantly low. I was having these contractions, 2 serious issues when you're only 34 weeks pregnant. So they pumped me full of fluids. They did like a secondary ultrasound to make sure that it went up. It went up to, I think, like maybe an 11 or like a 9. I don't really remember. But it went up to wherever they were comfortable with sending me home. My contractions stopped. So it turned out they thought that I was just like, they thought that it was just like the hydration. You know, when you're pregnant, you have to drink like significantly more water. And even though I was drinking a lot of water, it just wasn't enough. So they kind of ruled it out as just being dehydration. I went in the next day to my OB to have a follow-up ultrasound, and that one showed that my amniotic fluid was at a 3. So at that point, it becomes detrimental to the baby because there's so little fluid in there that your baby really can't survive. So they put me in the hospital. At that point, I had reached 35 weeks. They put me in the hospital. I was in the hospital. They were talking about inducing me at, maybe I wasn't 35 weeks. I think I was like 34 and maybe like 2 at that point, actually, because I remember them talking about keeping me in the hospital until 35 weeks and then inducing. But then they came back in and they did a follow-up ultrasound, and after running fluids, my amniotic fluid was up to an 11.1 or something like that, give or take. So it was normal again. They were like, your amniotic fluid's not low. We're not going to induce. Go home. So I went home. So fast forward 35 weeks, I'm having these preeclamptic symptoms again. I can hardly go pee. Like, I'm passing like less and less urine. My swelling's getting worse. My headaches are getting worse. I'm vomiting all the time again, even with this medication that I'm on to help me stop. It was just a lot. So I went back to the hospital. So they do what's called a 24-hour urine test. And that shows that my protein in my urine was up to like 250. So the threshold for a preeclampsia diagnosis is 300. They sent me home. They told me it's only 250. You can go home. You don't have preeclampsia. I'm like, okay. Next week I come back. I'm having these same exact symptoms. They triage me. They do this 24-hour urine test again. My protein in my urine is at 500. So now I'm past the threshold, but my blood pressures are still not meeting what they consider like a big deal, I guess. Like, they can't induce me for high blood pressure if I don't have high blood pressure, kind of thing. So at that point, I was given my preeclampsia diagnosis that I had been telling them for 10 weeks, 12 weeks technically, that I had. And they set up a induction a week later at 37 weeks. So 37 weeks on the dot, I come into the hospital for my induction. They don't even start it until 2 hours late. They were running behind. Totally fine. I get it. I understand it. But I had to sit in the waiting room. I had a severe migraine. People were talking super loud. For some reason, they felt the need to yell at each other across the room. So by that point, I was just irritated. I wasn't allowed to eat. I had a migraine. I was big and pregnant and angry and miserable. And these people were yelling, and I didn't want to hear it. So finally, they let me in my room. They started the induction at, I think, like 9 p.m. And it was technically supposed to start at 6. Like, that was the time I was scheduled to arrive. They were starting the induction at 7. So 2 hours later was when they actually started the induction. So for the beginning stages of the induction, they started with something called Cervidil, which is just like it's like a strip that they put. It's like similar to like a tampon. Again, sorry for the TMI, but it's just what it is. That they put inside of your cervix to get it to dilate. It doesn't always work. It doesn't usually work. Like, it's just like the first step to try to get you to go into active labor on your own without Pitocin and stuff. It's like a more natural way. So the next morning, I believe I was at like 3 centimeters. No. Yeah, I was at, I think, 3 centimeters, like when they took the Cervidil out. But I still wasn't, I wasn't having like regular contractions, and I wasn't going into active labor. So at that point, they decided, sorry, my phone is vibrating. I have a text message. At that point, they decided to break my water. So they came in at 11 that afternoon, and they broke my water. They waited a little bit. Still nothing was happening. So they started me on the Pitocin directly after they broke my water. And instantly, I started going into like regular contractions. They were super hard, high contractions. It was horrible. Like, it was horrible. It all came on so quickly and so strong that my body literally like couldn't stand it. Now, granted, labor is never comfortable, so obviously probably what it was, but I asked for pain medication. I didn't want like the epidural or anything. I wanted the, like, they can give you like oral or IV medication early in your labor to push you back so that you can hold off on the epidural, which is what I wanted. So I had asked for pain medication, but whatever they gave me, which I know what they gave me Stadol and Phenergan. Phenergan is a nausea drug, but it's also used in they were using the Phenergan IV, which they should have never done. It should always be given by injection because it's extremely strong. And it can basically like cause people to lose their mind. It's not supposed to be given IV. So they gave it to me IV with the Stadol, which is a pain medication, and the intention was to keep me from getting nauseous from the pain medication, but they just gave it to me the wrong way than what's recommended. So it kind of made me unconscious. Like, I felt all of a sudden instantly my eyes rolled to the back of my head, and I can hear everything that was going on around me, but I couldn't respond. Like, I couldn't function. I couldn't move my body. I couldn't answer when people were talking to me. Like, I literally couldn't do anything. It was like I was dead but alive. It was really weird. It was really scary. And all I hear in my ear is people talking about my son's heart rate is dropping. My son's heart rate is dropping. They said that it dropped into the 90s, and I couldn't respond. So I'm getting emotional, trying not to. So I was freaking out, but I couldn't respond. Like, I couldn't function. So I'm hearing everything they're saying, and I'm freaking out that I'm losing my baby. And I can't respond to anything. So they're talking about, like, a C-section. Let's bring her into a C-section immediately. We need to get this baby out. All of a sudden, the pain meds wore off. I could talk again. They're telling me I'm going for a C-section. Now, obviously, I already knew this because I heard everything, but I couldn't respond. So they get me all situated for a C-section. They put in a catheter. And then my baby's heart rate, obviously, after the pain meds wore off, my baby's heart rate went back up. So they're like, cancel the C-section. She doesn't need a C-section. Granted, I understand you don't want a C-section unless you really need it. But then they made me labor with the catheter in, which clearly when you're contracting, your body is trying to push everything out. So that should have never happened. They should have removed the catheter had I not been having a C-section so that I could pass urine. Because that led to even more issues trying to make me labor with this catheter in. It got to the point where I was letting out maybe like 1 cc of urine, which I don't know. Not a lot of you aren't medical people, so when you see this, you're gonna be like, well, what does that mean? Basically, it was like a drop of urine every hour. Like, that's how much urine I was able to pass, because the catheter has like a hole that goes into the urethra. But when your body's contracting, it pushes everything that's in that area down. So it was pushing the hole where it couldn't reach my urethra. So I wasn't able to pass urine. So I was just uncomfortable because I had to pee, like, and nobody was listening to me. They wouldn't take the catheter out. I told them, like, please just put me on a bedpan, like, just take the catheter out. I need to pee, like, this is what's making it harder for me. Like, I would have been fine. I would have not ever asked for my epidural, but they would not listen to me. So at that point, I'm 4 centimeters, and I don't want an epidural at that point. But my doctor tells me they're not taking out this catheter, and the only thing that she can do is give me the epidural. So at that point, like, I knew I had to pee. She tells me the only thing we can do is give you an epidural so that you can relax, so that you can pass the urine. So they give me the epidural at 4 centimeters. That was great. I passed urine. I felt relief. Because, like, everything, once you get the epidural, everything, like, slows down, basically. The contractions get lighter. Basically, it calmed the contractions down enough for the catheter to go back into place where it needed to be so that I could pass urine. And I went to sleep. I went to sleep for like 3 hours. At that point, I was at 7 centimeters. So I slept through the entire, like, 4 to 7 centimeters time period. When I woke up at 7 centimeters, they started moving me back and forth because I guess my son's heart rate was starting to go down again. So they started, like, rolling me back and forth kind of to try to, like, get his heart rate up, to get me into labor, stuff like that. So once they did that, the epidural wore off. So at this point, I think I was like 8 centimeters once the epidural wore off. I began feeling everything. So this is like the hardest part of your labor. This is normally when people get the epidural, but mine had worn off. So the hospital I was at, it wasn't a situation where, like, usually they'll give you like I think it's a pump. Like, basically you press the pain meds when you need them. So for the epidural, like, you would press it when the pain is becoming unbearable, and it would just give you like a small bit of medication. With me, they gave it all to me at once. So we didn't have the pumps at the hospital I delivered at. So they give you your entire epidural at one time. So once you have that epidural, you're maxed out on pain meds. Because I had the IV pain meds, and I had the epidural at full dose. So I was, like, to the point where, again, I could not pass pee. And my contractions were ridiculous at that point. So I was begging them, like, can you please just give me something so that I can pass urine? And again, they wanted to give me, they're like, well, you're maxed out on pain meds. And I'm like, I don't want pain meds. Like, I want to go pee. Just take the catheter out. Just take the catheter out. Like, so they wouldn't let me get up to go to the bathroom, which I get it. I'm in active labor. I understand, but just put me on a bedpan. Do something. Let me pee on my own without this catheter in, because the catheter is literally what screwed up the entire labor. So they called anesthesia down. They figured out how to give me more medication, I guess, because they thought that medication was the answer to everything. Even though I wasn't asking for meds, I was asking to go pee, which is a normal bodily function that we all have to do. But apparently that was me asking for more pain medication, so they gave me more. So I told them that this is so weird to talk about on camera. When you're in labor and you start to feel pressure in your rectum, that usually means that you're ready to push. Like that usually means you're 10 centimeters fully effaced and your baby's ready to come. So within literally 5 minutes, I went from 8 centimeters to 10. Nobody believed me. I'm telling them, like, I feel pressure in my rectum. I'm telling you, you need to recheck me. Nobody's listening to me. They're refusing to check me. So my doctor came in at this point, and she's like, what's wrong with you? Why are you freaking out? Because at this point, I'm irritated. I'm yelling, like, I think I'm about to have this baby, and nobody's listening to me. So my doctor's like, just calm down. What's going on? So I told her, like, I have pressure in my rectum, and I really think that it's time. And my doctor's like, starting to yell at the nurses because the nurses aren't listening to me. Now, I'm the one that's feeling this, so she's like, if she's saying she's feeling it, just check her. It's not that difficult. So she checks me. She tells them, I don't know who said that she's 8 centimeters. She is 10 centimeters. She's fully effaced, and her baby is not in her birth canal. She needs to get to a C-section immediately. So now my doctor's pissed off. I'm pissed off. I am having contraction after contraction, and I am miserable. So 20 minutes later, we're all set up for the C-section. They come in to get me for the C-section. They refused to move me over to the surgical bed. So from my bed to the surgical bed, which is like a super tiny cross-looking thing, literally like you sit on the shit like this, with your arms out. Mind you, I have a herniated disc in my neck from being in a car accident. So being in the bed all day long, I was induced at 37 weeks exactly. So this was at 37 weeks and 2 days when I actually went into my C-section and had my son. So I had been in the bed for about 27 and a half hours at that point. So obviously any normal person without any back issues or neck issues would have trouble being in the bed for that long because it's just uncomfortable. You're stuck in one position. You're not able to get up and stretch. So at this point, my herniated disc in my neck was extremely painful. It was more painful than the contractions at that point, and I told them that. But they're like, well, the pain meds should be working on that. And I'm like, they're not, because I can't get up and stretch. You're not understanding. I'm telling you, this is severe. I can't move over and keep my arms out like that, because when my arms are out like that, it's exacerbating the herniated disc. So I asked them, can I just keep my arms below the bed? I'm not gonna move, I promised. And they're like, no, you can't do that. So they taped my arms down after forcing me to move myself over when I was mid contraction. And I told them, I feel like I can't move myself over. I'm in too much pain and I'm too uncomfortable. I need somebody's help. And they made me move over on my own. Even though there was 5 or 6 people in the room, so they could have easily moved me over, but they wouldn't. They made me move over. So they taped my arms down so that I couldn't put them down, because all I was trying to do was take them down so that it would level out my spine, so that it wasn't putting the pressure on my herniated disc. And I even asked them, can I just have one arm down, just one, and I promise I'm not gonna move my arm. But they wouldn't let me. So I ended up somehow getting one of my arms free, and they let me keep it down, which made the labor, made the actual C-section 10 times better. Because at that point, my biggest issue wasn't even the C-section. It was my neck. So they finally just stopped fighting with me, because I got my arm free from the tape, and I wasn't touching anything. I wasn't being difficult. I was just telling them I need my arm down. It's uncomfortable for my neck. So they finally stopped. They stopped fighting me on that. And then I felt everything. When you're in a C-section, you think you're under all these pain meds and stuff. You're not gonna feel much. I didn't feel the cut when they cut me. I didn't feel that. But them moving around my organs, this is so disgusting to even talk about, but that's just the best way I can. It is the most painful sensation to have your organs moved around. If you've ever had a C-section, you pretty much probably know what I'm talking about. It just hurts like a bitch. Excuse my terminology, but it really does. It's really painful. So then when they took my son out, most relief I had felt in 9 months. It was the most relieving experience ever. Um, yeah, and then they put everything back. That was super painful. And then they stitched me up, which I didn't feel. Um, Brought me into recovery. Everything was good. Then I found out my son had low blood sugar. So he was supposed to be strictly breast, no formula. But because of the low blood sugar, it was either I gave him formula or I gave him D5. So I chose the formula. Then he was having trouble keeping down his feeds. So he was spitting up like entire feeds. I was having to refeed him because of the low blood sugar. He had to keep that sugar in him in order to bring up his blood sugar to be able to regulate it. So he almost ended up in the NICU. They did one last blood sugar that they told me if it wasn't over 50 that he would have to go to NICU. So it was exactly 50. So he didn't have to go to NICU. But they basically accused me of doing drugs during my pregnancy, even though I told them, like, go ahead and test him, go ahead and test me. I've never done drugs. I wouldn't do drugs. Like, I didn't even want to take Tylenol when I was pregnant. And they're like, well, you have a history of bipolar, so there's some reason why your son has these issues, why he has tremors, why he has low blood sugar. They were just blaming me, and they were trying to make me out to be this horrible drug addict because I have bipolar. Accusing me of taking like recreational drugs. They accused me of taking bipolar meds that weren't safe for pregnancy. They accused me of literally so many things. And it was like I was under a microscope just because of the fact that I had mental illness. And I really thought they were going to try to take my baby because at that point he had already been tested. Like, he was at least a day old at that point. So they tested him directly after he came out. They tested me when I was in labor. They tested him again when they had him in the nursery trying to figure out why his blood sugar was low and why he had tremors. So they've had all of these different tests done on him to see that I had not done drugs, but they were still accusing me. So I called my parents freaking out, saying like they're going to try to take my son away just because of the fact that I have mental illness. They're trying to accuse me of being a drug addict, and I'm not. So my mom came up and she literally like flipped out on the NICU doctor. My wife flipped out on the NICU doctor, and then we got to go home like the next day or something like that. But super long video. That is my entire trying to conceive, my pregnancy, my labor and delivery. I went into more detail about the labor and delivery. If you guys want details on the pregnancy was a handful, but the labor and delivery was the most traumatic part of the experience, so I just did the most details on that. But if you guys do want a video of the pregnancy details, I'm more than willing to make that. If anybody even watches this video, because it is super long, like it's going to take a long time to sit here and watch it, but I went ahead and I made this video. I've been putting it off forever because it's a lot of information. It's a lot of time, super time consuming, super long, super traumatic. So it was a lot to drudge back up because it was a really traumatic experience for me to the point where like I don't ever want to have another kid because of what I went through. But yeah, so if you guys enjoyed this, please like it. If it's your first time here, please click the subscribe and turn on notifications. I'm not going to promise to be routine with my posting because we all know that's a lie, but I will post. I'm not like done with YouTube or anything, but I just have a busy life. So if this interests you, please leave a comment below. If you want to tell your story, please leave a comment with your story. Any questions I can answer. I'm more than willing to answer questions. But yeah, I hope you guys have a lovely day. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And thanks for being loyal subscribers.